If you like this story, drop a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed to Quiet Vengeance yet, now's a good time. I want to tell you something before I start. I'm 63 years old. I've been in commercial real estate development for 31 years. I've shaken hands with premiers, sat across from federal regulators, and once spent 4 hours in a boardroom in Calgary with a man who called himself a visionary and turned out to be a fraudster with excellent shoes. I've seen a lot of human behavior in my time. None of it prepared me for what my wife did in front of a room full of people at the Harbour Club in Vancouver on the coldest Friday in February I can remember. Her name was Diane. We were married for 19 years. His name was Fletcher Gaul. And the thing he slid across that bar toward me, a single business card, face down, like he was paying a bar tab, was the thing I kept in the inside pocket of my coat for 41 days. Until I handed it back. Let me back up. My wife had always wanted to be around people who moved in what she called the right circles. I never understood the geography of that phrase. Right circles. As though the world was organized into rings and your worth was determined by which one you stood in. I came from Nanaimo. My father poured concrete for 30 years. My mother cleaned rooms at the Travelodge on the Island Highway until her knees gave out. Right circles were not a concept that arrived early in our home. What arrived was work and patience, and the quiet accumulation of things built rather than inherited. I met Diane in 1994 at a charity auction at the Fairmont in Victoria. She was volunteering, organizing the paddle cards, wearing a red blouse that she later told me she'd borrowed from her roommate because her own clothes weren't nice enough for the room. I thought that was the most honest thing a person had ever said to me at a charity event. I married her 4 years later in a small ceremony in Qualicum Beach. 18 guests, good wine, her grandmother's ring. For the first 12 years, we built something real. A home in Kitsilano, 2 daughters, a business that started as a 2-person operation out of a rented office on Granville and grew into something I'm not going to describe in detail right now, because that detail is the whole point, and I need you to understand what I was before I tell you what happened. The drift started slowly. Diane began spending more time with women whose husbands were in finance, tech, the kind of work that produced the right visible markers, the waterfront properties, the Whistler ski chalets, the names dropped in the right rooms with the right casual confidence. She started noticing things. The neighborhood, the car I drove, a sensible but unglamorous Volvo she'd once called practical, and now sometimes called boring. The way I wore the same good watch I'd had since 2007, instead of upgrading to something that announced itself when you walked into a room. I noticed her noticing. I filed it away. That's what I do. I'm a patient man. The invitation to the Harbour Club dinner came through her friend Margot, whose husband Derek had recently done something lucrative in lithium batteries and was in a generous mood about inclusion. Black tie, 200 guests, the top floor of a building on West Georgia, with a view of the inlet that on a clear night made the whole city look like it had been arranged specifically to impress you. I put on my good suit. The dark charcoal one I wore to important things and said nothing about. My daughters always said it made me look like a professor who secretly ran things. They weren't wrong, but I never said that out loud. Diane wore a dress I hadn't seen before. Midnight blue, silk, the kind of purchase made without conversation. She looked beautiful in it. I told her so. She said, "Don't make it a thing, Martin." That was the second sign. I'd missed the first one in October. I didn't miss this one. We drove to the club, handed the car to a young man who looked at the Volvo with the specific patience of someone trained not to react, and walked into the elevator together. Diane checked her reflection in the elevator doors. I watched her. She didn't look at me. The room was exactly what rooms like that are. High ceilings, low music, the warm amber of expensive lighting, and the specific hum of people who are performing a version of themselves they've rehearsed. I shook hands with Derek, who was genuinely kind and loud in the way of men who know they've been lucky and feel obliged to fill the room with the energy of it. I shook hands with people whose names I'll leave out. I found a good position near the windows and watched the lights on the water and thought about a project we were breaking ground on in Langley in the spring. That's when I saw him. Fletcher Gaul was standing near the bar as though the bar had been built around him. 60 maybe, though the kind of 60 that has been maintained at considerable expense, tanned in February, which in Vancouver means either money or Mexico or both. Hair silver and kept. A suit that fit the way suits fit when someone has come to your home and measured you for them. He was speaking with two men who were both laughing at whatever he'd just said. That particular laugh of people auditioning for proximity to someone they've decided matters. Diane was looking at him. She wasn't looking at her drink or at Margot or at the skyline. She was looking at Fletcher Gaul with the specific attention of someone who has already done background research. Margot made the introduction 40 minutes later. I watched it happen from across the room, the way you watch a flight departure board when you already know your flight has been cancelled and you're waiting for the screen to confirm it officially. Diane laughed at something he said. The real laugh, not the company laugh, not the polite laugh. The laugh that means you have forgotten you're performing. I got a drink, a scotch, neat, Oban, the good one. I sipped it and I thought about nothing useful, which is what I do when my mind is actually running very fast and I don't want anyone to know it. Fletcher Gaul found me eventually. Men like him always do, because eliminating the variable is how they manage a room. He arrived with the smooth intentionality of someone who has never once worried about being unwelcome. Martin, is it? He said my name like he'd already assessed it and found it serviceable, not impressive. That's right. I extended my hand. Martin Calloway. He shook it. Perfectly calibrated grip, the kind you learn. Fletcher Gaul, your wife's been telling me about you. Commercial real estate, she said. Among other things, I said. He smiled. The smile of a man who has heard among other things 100 times from men who meant nothing by it. Modest. I appreciate that. He didn't appreciate it. He catalogued it. I'm in private equity. Resource sector, primarily. A bit of infrastructure. He let those words settle like he'd placed them on a velvet tray for examination. Good sector, I said. Diane appeared at his elbow. She was holding a fresh glass of wine, and she was glowing in the specific way of someone who has found the room they were always looking for, and is relieved to finally be standing in it. She looked at Fletcher with something I recognized from 19 years ago in a different room entirely. That look had been for me, once. Fletcher was just talking about the lodge property on Haida Gwaii, she said to me, but she was looking at him when she said it. Apparently it's extraordinary. I've been up there, I said. Beautiful islands. Fletcher tilted his head slightly. Do you know it well? Well enough, I said. Something shifted behind his eyes. A quiet recalibration. Not concern. Just the minor administrative adjustment of a man who has determined you're not worth the calculation. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a business card. Not handed it to me. Slid it onto the bar top beside my glass, face down, the way you leave a tip for someone you won't be seeing again. Give my office a call if you're ever looking to step up your portfolio, he said. The smile again. Performed. Don't worry about Diane tonight. We'll keep her company. Will, plural. But there was only him. I looked at the card. I looked at Diane. She was looking at her wine glass. 19 years, and she was looking at her wine glass. I picked up the card, slowly, the way I pick up documents I intend to review carefully. Slid it into the inside pocket of my coat, right against my chest. Smoothed the lapel flat. Thank you, Fletcher, I said. Quiet. Level. The specific tone I use when I have made a final decision and no longer require input from anyone else in the room. I'll hold on to that. I shook his hand. I nodded at my wife. I excused myself and walked to the window to look at the lights on the water, and I did not look back. I had the car brought around at 9:40. I didn't say goodbye to Diane. I sent her a text. Getting tired. Heading home. Safe night. She replied 11 minutes later. Okay, don't wait up. I drove home to Kitsilano. Parked in my own driveway. Sat in the Volvo in the dark for a while with the engine off, listening to the city. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, Helen Brask, who had been my legal counsel for 14 years and had a gift for answering calls at inconvenient hours without making you feel like an inconvenience. She answered on the second ring. It's Martin, I said. A pause, the careful kind. Tell me. I told her. All of it. The card on the bar. The we. Diane's wine glass. When I finished, Helen was quiet for a moment in the way of people who are not deciding what to feel, but deciding what to do with what they already feel. How long have you been thinking something was wrong? She asked. Since October, I said. And the business accounts? Separate. Have been for 16 months. I could hear her exhale slowly. All right, Monday morning. My office, 8 o'clock. Bring everything you've already pulled together, because I know you've pulled something together. The green folder on my desk in the study, I said. Of course there's a green folder, she said. Martin, I'm sorry. Thank you, Helen. I hung up and sat quietly for a while longer. Then I made the second call. I'm not ready to tell you who I called yet, but I will tell you that the person on the other end of that call knew Fletcher Gaul's name before I finished saying it, and said simply quietly, "How much do you want him to know?" I thought about the card in my inside pocket, the way it had been slid across the bar face down, the way Fletcher Gaul had said we. "Everything," I said, "but not yet. Let me pick the time." "Understood," they said. I went inside, poured a small amount of single malt, sat at the kitchen table in the house I had bought in 1999 and paid off in 2011, and renovated twice and raised 2 daughters in, and I looked at Fletcher Gaul's business card for a long time. Gaul Capital Group, Private Equity and Strategic Investments, a phone number, a Burrard Street address. I turned it face down on the table, which seemed appropriate, and I started thinking. By the time I went to bed at 1 in the morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Diane came home at 2:15. I heard her key in the lock, heard her steps in the hallway, heard her pause outside the bedroom door. Then she went to the guest room. She'd made that decision herself. I hadn't asked her to. I lay in the dark and thought about the lodge on Haida Gwaii, the way the light comes through old-growth cedar. I'd been up there twice, both times alone, for work. I'd meant to take Diane. We'd never found the time. Monday morning came gray and wet, the way Vancouver Mondays specialize in, with low clouds sitting on the North Shore mountains, and rain tapping the kitchen window while I made coffee and listened to the house breathe around me in that particular way of houses that know something has changed in them. Diane was already gone when I came downstairs. A coffee cup in the drying rack, rinsed and placed with her usual precision. No note. I put on my dark charcoal suit. Helen Brask's office was on the 18th floor of a building on Hornby, the kind of office that is deliberately understated, because the people who work there have nothing left to prove to a room. She shook my hand, closed the door, poured 2 coffees, and sat across from me with the green folder I'd messengered over Sunday evening already open in front of her. "Tell me about the business structure first," she said. So I did. I had been in commercial real estate development for 31 years. What most people at parties like the Harbour Club dinner didn't know, because I didn't talk about it at parties, was that 17 years ago, I had established a private holding company incorporated in British Columbia that held the majority interest in 6 commercial development projects and 2 residential towers, 1 completed, 1 breaking ground in Langley in April. The holding company was called North Line Property Group. North Line was not a name I ever used socially. It didn't have a website designed to impress. It had a registered office and a very quiet but extremely substantial balance sheet, and a reputation in the development community that I had spent 17 years building carefully, like a man who has learned that the things you build loudly tend to attract people interested in the noise rather than the structure. "The personal assets," Helen said, without looking up. "The house in Kitsilano, a property in Tofino. The Whistler condo I'd purchased in 2018 without telling Diane, not out of deception, but because I'd learned by then that acquisitions discussed in advance became negotiations, and I was tired of negotiating about things I'd earned. She signed the disclosure documents at renewal, Helen had told me then. She has legal notice. That's sufficient. It had been. All clean, I said. And the marital contribution? Joint contributions to the Kitsilano property ended in 2019, when I bought out her equity share as part of the refinance. She received $78,000 in the transaction. Signed everything. She was in Tofino that weekend, actually. Signed electronically. Helen looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Martin, I'm a patient man," I said. She almost smiled. "I know you are." She made a note. "All right, here's where we are." What Helen told me next I'll summarize this way. The situation was clean, cleanable, and manageable, provided I was willing to proceed methodically. I was very willing to proceed methodically. Methodical is my native language. I left her office at 10:15 with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The gray had lifted a little outside, the mountains showing their edges again through the rain. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed the cold February air. Then I called my building superintendent and asked him to meet me at the Kitsilano property at noon to discuss some maintenance that needed attending to. The maintenance was the locks. By 12:45, every exterior lock in the house had been changed. Front, back, garage keypad. The superintendent, A steady man named Bart, who had worked for me for 11 years and understood discretion the way tradespeople who work for careful people eventually do, handed me the single new set of keys without comment. "Anything else?" he said. "Not today," I said. "Thank you, Bart." I tipped him generously, shook his hand, and drove back to Northline's downtown office. My assistant Priya was at her desk when I arrived. She looked at my suit, then at my face and said, "Tea or coffee?" "Coffee," I said, "and ask Raymond to come in when he gets a chance." Raymond Osei had worked with me for 9 years. He was 41, meticulous, exceptionally good with complex financial structures, and one of the 7 people in my professional life who knew the full scope of what Northline actually represented. He knocked on my office door at 1:15, came in, and sat down without being asked, which is something he only did when he already knew it was going to be that kind of conversation. "I heard from Warren this morning," he said, before I'd said anything. Warren Chu was my contact at a mid-sized private equity advisory firm in Toronto that had, over the past 8 months at my quiet direction, been conducting a thorough background review on Gala Capital Group and its principal. Raymond was one of the people who knew about Warren Chu. He was also one of the people who knew why I'd asked for the review in October. I said, "And?" Raymond placed a single printed page on my desk, face down, just like Fletcher's card. He'd done that on purpose. I appreciated it. I turned it over. I read it. Then I put it down, laced my fingers together and looked out the window at the inlet, at the mountains behind it, at the specific pewter gray of the water on a February afternoon. I said. Raymond waited. Here is what that page told me. Fletcher Gaul had founded Gala Capital Group in 2016 following his departure from a previous firm under circumstances described in a regulatory filing as a mutual separation following a review of compliance practices. The review had been conducted by the British Columbia Securities Commission. The findings had been partially redacted, but the conclusions had not. He had relocated to Vancouver from Toronto in 2018. He had a penthouse in Cole Harbour and a property in West Vancouver. He had 7 active investment relationships in the private equity space. 2 of those 7 relationships were with funds administered by a registered investment manager in Calgary named Crestwood Meridian Capital. I am the majority owner of Crestwood Meridian Capital. I had been since 2014. I held that interest through a numbered company registered in Alberta. My name appeared nowhere in Crestwood's public-facing materials. Fletcher Gaul had been using my money for 4 years without knowing it was mine. I looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at me. He slid a card across the bar at me, I said. Raymond closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. He slid a card. Face down, I said, like a tip. Raymond was quiet for a moment, doing the same arithmetic I'd done Sunday night in my driveway. Does he know? He said. He knows Crestwood, I said. He does not know Crestwood's ownership structure. I straightened the page in front of me. He doesn't know my name in that context. He knows Martin Calloway from Kitsilano, who drives a Volvo. Raymond sat very still for a moment. Then he said in a careful, measured voice, "What do you want to do?" I thought about Diane looking at her wine glass. I thought about the card slid face down across a bar in a room full of people who thought they knew who mattered and who didn't. "I want to do nothing dramatic," I said. "I want to do something precise." I picked up the phone and called Warren Chu in Toronto. I told him to send a letter. Crestwood Meridian Capital's standard letters were unremarkable documents. Formal, correct, written in the language of institutional finance, which is a language specifically designed to communicate serious things in a tone that makes them sound administrative rather than catastrophic. The letter I asked Warren to send to Fletcher Gaul's fund administrator was entirely within Crestwood's contractual rights, under a provision in the partnership agreement Fletcher had signed in 2020. Section 11, Clause 3, Subparagraph F. The right to request a comprehensive operational audit of all fund activities tied to Crestwood's capital. Not punitive, not hostile, just thorough. And thorough, in the world of private equity, is a word that travels fast and lands heavily. Warren sent the letter Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Diane texted me. "We need to talk. I'm at Margot's." I waited an hour, then called her back. "Martin." Her voice had lost its rehearsal. Whatever she'd planned to say had been revised multiple times before she dialed and still hadn't landed cleanly. "Diane," I said. Same energy. "I went to the house." A pause. "My key didn't work." "No," I said. It wouldn't. Silence. I'm sorry about Friday, she said. And this is the thing about Diane, the thing I had loved and eventually had to grieve. She was capable of genuine honesty. She just reached for it too late, the way people reach for an umbrella after they're already standing in the rain. I know you are, I said. I want to come home, Martin. I looked out the window of my office. The rain had stopped. The mountains were back, sharp and white-topped against a sky that had finally cleared. Diane, I said, do you remember the weekend we drove up to Tofino in 2003, before the girls? Just the two of us, the old Subaru, that place on the beach that served clam chowder out of bread bowls. A pause. Of course I remember. You told me that weekend that you loved me because I was the most solid thing you'd ever stood on. I let that sit for a moment. I thought about that a lot over the years. Quiet on the other end. I'm going to have Helen reach out to your lawyer about the process, I said. You'll be looked after properly. The Tofino property is in your name as of this morning. Helen arranged it. It's worth more than you know. I paused. Because I looked after things. Even when you stopped noticing, I heard her breath catch, small and genuine, the sound of a person receiving something they didn't expect to be given. Martin, take care of yourself, Diane. I said it the way you say things you've decided are final and kind at the same time, because final and kind are not opposites, even though people treat them that way. The girls will want to hear from you. Call them. I hung up. I sat quietly for 30 seconds. Then I allowed myself exactly one long breath, held, released slowly, the way my doctor had taught me in 2019 when my blood pressure started making suggestions I didn't appreciate. A man has to have limits. What happened between Tuesday and Thursday is best described as the sound of load-bearing assumptions coming apart. Fletcher Gaul's fund administrator received Crestwood's audit letter Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, 2 of Fletcher's active investment partners had called to check in, which is the private equity equivalent of strangers gathering around a fender bender to see if it's serious. By Wednesday, Warren told me that a third partner had requested a call, and that Fletcher's legal team, a boutique firm on West Georgia, had sent a preliminary inquiry about the audit scope. The inquiry had been responded to with the audit scope. The audit scope was extensive. Wednesday evening, Raymond knocked on my door at 6:15. He sat down, said nothing for a moment. Then, he called the office. I looked up. He got the main Crestwood number somehow. Asked to speak to senior management about the audit. Raymond paused. Priya routed it to Warren. Warren was unavailable. Warren will remain unavailable, I said, until Thursday at 10. Raymond nodded. He stood up to leave, then turned at the door. Martin, did you know about him before Friday? I thought about October, the green folder, Warren Chu, the numbered company in Alberta. I knew something was off, I said. I didn't know it was him specifically until I saw her face in that room. Raymond absorbed this. She didn't know what she was standing between, did she? No, I said. She thought she was standing between a man who mattered and a man who didn't. I looked at Fletcher Gaul's business card, still in my inside coat pocket where it had been since Friday. They rarely do, I said. He walked into Northline's boardroom Thursday at 10 o'clock with his lawyer, a composed man named Stuart Park, who had the bearing of someone who had read the file carefully and found the experience like stepping into cold water without warning. Fletcher himself arrived looking like a man who had not slept well, which for someone with his tan and his maintenance regime was a visible thing. Still straight-backed, still expensive watch, still moving with the muscle memory of someone accustomed to entering rooms on his own terms. He saw me. He went very still, not dramatically. Just the specific stillness of a man who has spent 72 hours reassembling a picture and has now seen the last piece arrive in the room wearing a charcoal suit. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and extended my hand. Fletcher, I said. Good morning. He shook it. His grip was different from Friday, less managed. Mr. Calloway, he said. Please, I said. Martin's fine. Sit down. They sat. Helen sat across from Stuart Park. Raymond sat beside me. I sat at the head of the table, and for a moment nobody said anything, and I let that moment run longer than was comfortable, because I'd earned that particular moment and I intended to use it. Then I reached into my inside coat pocket. I placed Fletcher Gaul's business card on the table between us, face down, exactly as he'd left it on the bar at the Harbour Club on Friday night. Face down. I pushed it gently across the table to him. I believe that's yours, I said. You left it with me Friday. The silence that followed was the most expensive silence I have ever sat inside. Fletcher looked at the card. He looked at me. He turned the card over himself, looked at his own name on it, then placed it flat on the table. A clean, precise gesture. The motion of a man who understands exactly what has just been communicated and has decided the only remaining dignified response is stillness. Stuart Park opened his portfolio and began discussing the audit timeline and resolution pathways. I let him talk. I watched Fletcher look slowly around the boardroom, the Northline Property Group letterhead on the folders in front of each seat, the framed site renderings on the wall, the Langley Tower in April, the completed Marine Drive project, the 2 mixed-use buildings in Surrey. The quiet solidity of a room that doesn't need to announce what happens in it because the people who use it already know. I watched the arithmetic arrive on his face. The way cold arrives. First you don't feel it, then you feel it everywhere. Helen and Raymond walked Stuart Park through the details of the audit, methodically, without drama, the way you walk someone through something you've prepared carefully and hoped you would never need. When they finished, the room was very quiet. Fletcher had said almost nothing for 40 minutes. It was the most composed I'd seen him. The audit closes on our timeline, I said. Your active deals remain intact pending findings. Your current fund relationships are not being terminated. This is an administrative process. Everything is going to be fine. He nodded. You'll simply have a complete picture, I said, of who has been your capital for the past 4 years. He nodded again, smaller this time. His jaw worked briefly, then settled. At the door he stopped. Turned. The card, he said. Quiet. Not a question. The card, I agreed. Something moved through his expression. Not quite remorse, not quite something I had a name for. The specific look of a man who has correctly identified the place where he went wrong and is honest enough, finally, to look at it straight on. I didn't read the room, he said. No, I said. You read me. You just didn't read carefully enough. He stood there for one more moment, and then Fletcher Gaul, penthouse in Cole Harbour, silver hair maintained at considerable expense. The specific confidence of a man who has never once been surprised by a room he walked into, nodded once, clean and final, and walked out. I stood at the boardroom window for a long while after that, looking at the water. The inlet was flat and gray-green in the February light, the North Shore mountains white above the cloud line, the way they look on the days that remind you why people came to this coast and stayed. I reached into my inside pocket, empty now. The card was on the table where I'd left it. Some things you put down. I thought about Diane, about clam chowder and bread bowls on a Tofino beach in 2003, the old Subaru, the way the Pacific looked in the morning with nobody else on the sand. I thought about the girls, about the phone calls I still needed to make and the Sunday dinners that would have to be renegotiated into new shapes. I thought about the house in Kitsilano that echoed now in a way that would take time to stop echoing. I thought about the Tofino property, in Diane's name as of Tuesday, worth more than she knew, because I had looked after things even when nobody was watching. That's the thing about building quietly. You're not doing it for the audience. You're doing it because the structure matters, because what you build is what you stand on when everything else shifts, and if it's solid, really solid, built from real things by real effort over real years, then it holds. Even then, especially then. I picked up my coat from the chair. Helen caught my eye across the boardroom. All right, she said. I will be, I said, which was not the same thing as fine, but was considerably more honest, and at 63, I've come to prefer honesty over convenience in most things. It's slower, it costs more, but it holds. I walked out of the boardroom, down the elevator, through the lobby, and out onto Hornby Street into the cold February air. I didn't look back, not once. A man I trusted told me something once, years ago, when I was in my early 40s and had just lost a deal I'd worked on for 14 months to a competitor who'd undercut us with promises he couldn't keep. I was angry about it. Not quietly angry. Actually angry, which was rare for me. And this man, who was 20 years older and had seen more business cycles than I'd had Saturday mornings, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Martin, the people who confuse visibility for value never understand why the quiet ones outlast them. Let them stay confused. It's their ceiling, not yours." I've thought about that a lot over the years. I think about it more now. Here is what I know after 63 years and 31 in this business, and 19 in a marriage that ended on a Friday in February with a card slid face down across a bar in front of a room full of people who thought they knew who mattered. The most important things are never the loudest things. The most solid ground is almost always the ground nobody thinks to look at, because it's been there so long it stopped seeming remarkable. The people who measure a man by his watch or his car, or which circles he stands in, will always, eventually, step onto ground they didn't bother to assess. And they will always be surprised by what they find beneath them. Don't confuse quiet for empty. Don't confuse patience for weakness. And don't, ever, hand a man you haven't bothered to know a card as though he's someone who needs your business. You might be handing him back something that was already his. And if you found something in this story worth holding on to, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Not everyone carries their worth loudly, but the ones who carry it quietly tend to carry it the longest.